For over 1,000 years, a civilization of stunning genius flourished in the heart of Mesoamerica. They were the Maya, a people who built cities that scraped the sky, who mastered the cosmos, and who developed a written language of breathtaking complexity. During their classic period, from around 250 to 900 CE, the Maya world was a thriving collection of kingdoms. It was a landscape of immense pyramids, sprawling palaces, and bustling plazas. At its height, around the year 750, their population may have swelled into the millions, supported by a sophisticated understanding of agriculture and resource management. They were astronomers who tracked the stars with pinpoint accuracy, mathematicians who independently conceived of the number zero, and artists who captured their world on stone with sublime skill. Their cities, places like Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul, were epicenters of culture, power, and innovation. But then, over the course of about a century, it all began to crumble. The grand temples were left to the jungle, the bustling cities became ghost towns, and a population of millions seemingly disappeared. The intricate system of kingdoms fractured, grand monuments were left unfinished, and the hum of a great civilization fell silent. This was the terminal classic collapse, one of the greatest societal disasters in human history, and for centuries, its cause has remained one of archaeology's most profound mysteries. So, what happened? How could a civilization of such scale and sophistication fall apart so quickly and so completely? For a long time, we searched for a single simple answer: an invading army, a deadly plague, a catastrophic volcano. But the truth, as we're now discovering, is far more complex and far more terrifying. The story of the Maya collapse isn't about one single event, but a slow, creeping catastrophe. It's the story of a perfect storm, where the very success of the Maya became the engine of their own destruction. And as we piece together the clues from crumbling ruins and the silent records of the earth itself, we're finally starting to understand the cascade of events that brought this magnificent world to its knees. To really get the scale of the collapse, you have to understand the heights from which the Maya fell. For much of its existence, the classic Maya civilization wasn't one unified empire, but a complex network of powerful city-states. They traded, competed, and allied with one another, a lot like ancient Greece. This world stretched across a huge territory in what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. It was a landscape totally transformed by human ingenuity. At the heart of this world were the cities. These weren't just collections of buildings, they were sprawling urban landscapes, architectural marvels designed to reflect the Maya worldview. Towering pyramids, some reaching over 200 feet into the sky, served as temples and tombs for divine rulers, their stairways a symbolic connection between our world and the heavens above. Sprawling palace complexes housed the royal courts, where the political and ritual life of the kingdom unfolded. These structures were often coated in brilliant lime plaster and painted with vibrant murals depicting gods, kings, and historical events. The scale of these cities was just staggering. Tikal, one of the most powerful kingdoms, grew to a population of around 50,000 people in its urban core, with many more in its sphere of influence. To support numbers like that, the Maya became masters of their environment. They engineered huge agricultural systems, including intricate networks of canals and raised fields in the swamplands, and extensive terracing on hillsides to get the most food possible. Their main crop was maize, which wasn't just food, but a central part of their identity and cosmology. But maybe their greatest achievements were intellectual. The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world, a complex mix of symbols that allowed them to record their history, rituals, and royal families in stunning detail on stone monuments called stelae. Their understanding of time and the cosmos was equally remarkable. They created a complex interlocking calendar system, including the 260-day sacred calendar and the 365-day solar calendar. Their most famous creation is the long count, a system that tracked time from a mythological starting point, letting them record dates with incredible precision. Their astronomical observations were so accurate that their calculation of the solar year is, in some ways, more precise than the calendar we use today. They tracked the cycles of Venus with obsessive detail, believing its movements held powerful omens for war and ritual. This wasn't just science for science's sake. It was deeply tied to their religion and politics. The kings, the Kul Ahau, or Holy Lords, were seen as divine go-betweens, their power linked to their ability to talk to the gods and keep the cosmic order. For centuries, this intricate system of belief, science, and power created a stable and prosperous world. It seemed destined to last forever, but it was built on a foundation that was becoming alarmingly fragile.
The image of the Maya collapse as a sudden, mysterious event is romantic, but it's just not accurate. The end didn't come overnight. It was a slow, agonizing process of disintegration that unfolded over roughly 150 years, primarily between 760 and 910 CE. And it didn't happen everywhere at once. The collapse was a rolling tide of catastrophe that began in the southern lowlands, the very heartland of classic Maya civilization, before spreading. For decades, scholars have debated dozens of single-cause theories: brutal warfare, a mysterious disease, social revolution, or foreign invasion. Each theory had its fans, but none could single-handedly explain the sheer scale and drawn-out nature of the decline. The truth we now understand is that there was no single cause. The collapse was the result of a toxic cocktail of multiple, interconnected crises that fed into one another, creating a feedback loop of destruction. The main drivers of this catastrophe were environmental degradation, escalating warfare, and crippling political instability, all slammed by the devastating hammer blows of climate change. The very factors that had fueled the Maya's rise, their massive population and intensive agriculture, slowly began to turn on them, transforming from strengths into critical vulnerabilities. Imagine a complex machine, its gears working in harmony for centuries. Now, imagine sand being poured into it, slowly, grain by grain. At first, the machine keeps running, maybe with a few groans. But as more sand is added, the friction increases, the gears grind, and the whole system comes under unbearable strain. This is what happened to Maya society. The sand was a collection of pressures that had been building for generations, largely unnoticed. When the machine finally broke, it did so spectacularly. The first and perhaps most significant stressor, the one that would test the limits of Maya ingenuity like never before, was a change in the one thing they couldn't control: the weather. For a civilization so dependent on agriculture, regular rainfall was the pulse of life. The Maya of the southern lowlands lived in a seasonal tropical environment with a long dry season. To survive, they had developed sophisticated water management systems, building vast reservoirs and canals to capture and store water from the wet season to last them through the arid months. For decades, this worked. But it was designed to handle predictable patterns, not a fundamental shift in the climate itself. Starting in the 1990s, scientists began to uncover clues hidden in the earth that pointed to a devastating climate event. The breakthrough came from analyzing sediment cores drilled from lake beds in the Yucatan Peninsula. Within these layers of ancient mud, scientists can read the history of the climate. What they found was startling. The data revealed that the period between 800 and 1000 CE was the driest the region had experienced in over 7,000 years. This wasn't just a bad drought, it was a mega drought, a fundamental century-long shift in climate. More recent high-resolution research has painted an even direr picture. By analyzing the chemical signatures within stalagmites from caves, scientists can reconstruct rainfall patterns on a yearly basis. This incredible technique has revealed that the mega drought was a series of intense, multi-year droughts that struck the region with terrifying frequency. Some of these droughts lasted between 3 and 20 years, and during their peak, annual rainfall may have decreased by 41 to 54%. One study even identified a punishing drought that lasted for 13 consecutive years. For the Maya, this would have been a slow-motion apocalypse. Imagine year after year of failed rains. The maize crops, the foundation of their diet, would wither. Food shortages would become widespread, leading to malnutrition and famine. The great reservoirs that sustained the cities would shrink and in some cases disappear. The impact on their society would have been just as severe. Maya kings weren't just political leaders, they were seen as divine figures whose main job was to communicate with the gods and ensure cosmic balance, which included bringing the rains. As the droughts intensified and the rituals failed to work, the people's faith in their rulers would have been shattered. The holy lords who once commanded unquestioning loyalty would have been exposed as powerless. This crisis of faith would have eroded the very foundations of their political structure. The droughts alone were a catastrophic blow, but they didn't happen in a vacuum. They struck a civilization that was already stretched to its absolute limit, and in doing so, they amplified a host of other problems that had been festering for generations. The Maya weren't simply passive victims of a changing climate. Their own actions had helped set the stage for the disaster to come. The classic Maya period was a story of incredible success and growth. But this success came at a steep environmental price. To feed a population that numbered in the millions, the Maya waged a war on the jungle, clearing vast swaths of forest for maize fields. To build their monumental cities, they consumed enormous quantities of wood. The production of lime plaster, the brilliant white coating that covered their temples and palaces, was particularly resource-intensive, requiring the burning of huge amounts of green wood to heat limestone. When you multiply that by thousands of massive structures across hundreds of cities, the scale of deforestation becomes almost unimaginable.
For a long time, the land could handle it, but as population swelled, the pressure on the environment became unsustainable. Clearing the forests had a series of devastating consequences. First, it directly worsened the droughts. Trees play a crucial role in the water cycle, and computer simulations have shown that widespread deforestation could have reduced local precipitation even further. In effect, the Maya were helping to make their own environment drier. Second, removing the forest cover led to widespread soil erosion. Without tree roots to anchor it, fertile topsoil would have been washed away by the rains or blown away by the wind. This made the land less productive, meaning they had to clear even more forest to produce the same amount of food, creating a vicious cycle of environmental decline. This man-made environmental crisis collided head-on with the climate crisis. The droughts made the forests more susceptible to fire, and the use of slash-and-burn agriculture only magnified this risk. A landscape that was once a resilient, diverse ecosystem was becoming a degraded, arid version of its former self. The agricultural systems that had been the bedrock of Maya civilization were beginning to fail. The consequences rippled through every level of society. As crop yields declined, the ability of the cities to support their massive populations was severely compromised. The very engine of Maya prosperity, intensive agriculture supporting dense urban centers, was grinding to a halt. This mounting agricultural crisis would in turn ignite another simmering problem, pushing it to a violent boiling point: war. Warfare was not new to the Maya. It had been a part of their political landscape for centuries, a tool used by city-states to gain tribute, territory, and dominance over rivals. For a long time, archaeologists believed that classic period warfare was mostly a ritualized affair, focused on capturing high-status individuals for sacrifice or ransom. They thought that truly destructive, total warfare was a feature only of the terminal classic period, a final spasm of violence brought on by desperation. However, recent discoveries have forced a dramatic rethinking. Inscriptions and archaeological evidence now show that large-scale, destructive warfare occurred much earlier than previously believed. A key piece of evidence comes from the city of Huitzna in modern-day Guatemala. A hieroglyphic inscription from the rival kingdom of Narancho boasts that in the year 697 CE, more than 100 years before the collapse truly began, Huitzna was attacked and burned. Archaeologists excavating a nearby lake found a thick layer of charcoal in the sediment dating to that exact period, confirming a massive fire. Excavations at Huitzna itself revealed widespread destruction of monuments and a dramatic decline in human activity right after the attack. This wasn't a ritual skirmish. This was a campaign of annihilation designed to wipe a city off the map. What changed during the Terminal Classic was not the nature of warfare, but its frequency and intensity.
As the pressures of drought, famine, and overpopulation mounted, conflicts between city-states escalated into a brutal, all-consuming struggle for survival. The focus shifted from capturing kings to controlling essential resources like fertile land and reliable water. Armies no longer just targeted each other, they targeted the very basis of their enemy's existence. Farms were burned, reservoirs were seized, and entire populations were displaced or killed. Archaeological evidence paints a grim picture. Many cities began to build heavy fortifications, like walls and moats, a clear sign of a world descending into chronic insecurity. In the ruins of the city of Canquen, archaeologists discovered a makeshift burial containing the bodies of the royal family, brutally executed and dumped with their jade jewelry still on, a testament to a violent and sudden overthrow of the ruling elite. This endemic warfare created a devastating feedback loop. It disrupted trade routes, which worsened shortages. It diverted precious labor away from farming and toward defense. And it forced people to flee their homes, leading to mass migrations of refugees that further strained resources. The kings were no longer just failing to bring the rain. They were leading their people into a vortex of self-destructive violence. While climate change, environmental decline, and warfare were tearing the Maya world apart from the outside, it was also rotting from within. The political and social systems that had governed the Maya for centuries proved tragically incapable of coping with the cascade of crises.
In fact, their very complexity became a liability. The anthropologist Joseph Tainter has argued that societies often collapse when being complex just stops paying off. Maya civilization is a textbook example. As their kingdoms grew, their administrative structures became larger and more bureaucratic. For a long time, this complexity paid off, generating wealth and stability. But when the crises hit, the system became too rigid and too costly to maintain. The immense bureaucracy that was once a strength became a crushing weight, unable to adapt. The authority of the ruling class, the Holy Lords, was built on two things: their perceived divine connection and their ability to provide security and food. As the crises intensified, both pillars crumbled. The failure of the kings to end the droughts shattered their religious authority. Their inability to prevent famine and their engagement in destructive, costly wars shattered their political legitimacy. Why would a starving farmer pay tribute to a king who could neither guarantee a harvest nor protect him from enemy raiders? This led to a breakdown of social control. We see evidence of this in the archaeological record. In some cities, royal monuments were deliberately defaced or destroyed, a clear act of rebellion. The violent slaughter of the elite at Canquen suggests a bloody internal uprising, not just an attack from a rival city. The political landscape fragmented. Large kingdoms broke apart into smaller competing factions. Alliances fractured as each city-state prioritized its own survival. This political disintegration made any large-scale coordinated response to the regional crises impossible. There was no central authority that could organize the redistribution of food or negotiate peace. Instead, the Maya world devolved into a patchwork of isolated, desperate communities. The elites were now either dead, deposed, or rendered utterly powerless, presiding over the ruins of their own kingdoms. For decades, the story of the Maya collapse was told in broad strokes. But as science has advanced, a much more nuanced picture has emerged. One of the biggest revelations is that the collapse wasn't a single event. It played out differently in different regions at different times. The collapse struck the southern and central lowlands first and hardest. Cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan experienced catastrophic population declines between roughly 800 and 900 CE. Yet while these southern cities were being abandoned, many cities in the northern Yucatan lowlands, like Chichen Itza, actually saw a period of growth. This regional variation is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It tells us that while drought was a huge factor, it can't be the only explanation, since some northern areas that thrived were also dry. But here's where the story gets another twist. Some of the latest research suggests a strange paradox. In some areas, the abandonment of cities seems to have continued after the climate had already started to improve. This challenges the simple idea that people fled cities only because of drought. So, if conditions were getting better, why were people still leaving? A likely answer is a fundamental shift in the cost-benefit analysis of city life. While the regional climate may have been improving, the immediate environments around the major cities had been utterly degraded by decades of overexploitation. The soils were exhausted, the local forests were gone, and the water sources may have been polluted. At the same time, the political and economic systems that made city life attractive, security, trade, opportunity, had completely broken down.
In this context, newly livable rural areas, away from the chaos and decay of the cities, would have seemed incredibly appealing. Leaving the cities was no longer just an act of desperation. It was a rational choice. It was a chance to escape a failed ruling class, to find new, more fertile land, and to gain more freedom. people weren't just running from a disaster, they were running towards a better life. The great cities had become engines of their own demise, creating environments so toxic and social systems so broken that their populations chose to walk away, leaving the monumental stone structures to be reclaimed by the jungle. The Maya people didn't vanish, they dispersed, reorganizing themselves into a new, more sustainable way of life. There is no single bullet that killed classic Maya civilization. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The solution to the mystery isn't which theory, drought, warfare, overpopulation, or political failure is correct. The solution is that they are all correct. The collapse was the result of a perfect storm, a catastrophic convergence of factors that fed into and amplified one another. It began with success. The Maya built a magnificent civilization on a foundation of intensive agriculture and population growth. This success, however, made them deeply vulnerable. They built a complex society on an environmental knife edge. Then the climate changed. A series of severe, prolonged droughts struck the heartland of their civilization. This was the primary catalyst, the massive shock that sent the entire system spiraling. The droughts triggered agricultural failure and water scarcity. This climate crisis was made worse by a man-made environmental crisis. Decades of deforestation had degraded the landscape, causing soil erosion and even making the droughts worse. These environmental pressures collided with a demographic crisis. The massive populations in large urban centers could no longer be fed. This led to famine and a desperate competition for dwindling resources. This resource competition ignited a political and military crisis. Internal warfare escalated into brutal, all-out conflicts that destabilized the region, disrupted trade, and drained resources. Finally, the entire system was undermined by a crisis of governance. The divine kings and the ruling elite lost their legitimacy as they failed to solve the problems. The complex political structures proved too rigid to adapt, and social cohesion dissolved, leading to internal conflict and rebellion. No single one of these factors would likely have been enough to destroy the civilization. The Maya had weathered droughts and wars before, but the relentless combination of all of them hitting a society at its most vulnerable point was simply too much to bear. Each crisis fed the others. Drought led to famine, which led to war, which led to political collapse, which made it impossible to deal with the drought. It was a complete systems failure. The collapse was not an event, but a process. It was a slow unraveling that took place over a century and a half, leaving behind ghost cities and a scattered population. The Maya people themselves did not vanish. They survived, adapting and reorganizing themselves into smaller communities. Their descendants still live in the region today, a living link to one of history's most brilliant and tragic civilizations. The story of the Maya collapse is a sobering reminder that even the most sophisticated societies are fragile, and that the relationship between climate, environment, and social stability is a balance that, once broken, can lead to ruin. The story of the Maya holds powerful lessons for our own world as we face challenges of climate change and resource management. If you found this investigation fascinating, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the great mysteries of history. And let us know in the comments, what other historical collapse would you like us to explore next? The silent ruins of the Maya, shrouded in jungle green, are not just monuments to a lost world. They're a warning. They tell the story of a civilization that reached for the stars,
but ultimately forgot the fragility of the earth beneath its feet. They show us how a complex, brilliant society can be brought down by a convergence of forces, a changing climate, a degraded environment, and social systems unable to cope. The Maya did not vanish, their world did. And in the stones of Tikal and the rubble of Copan, we can read a timeless lesson about the delicate balance on which all civilizations, including our own, ultimately rest.